So at the age of 14, I got dragged into the cartel. And I said, choice number 1, you can kill me right now. Choice number 2, I will have Eduardo kill you tomorrow.
So this guy can only move his face since birth, and he was forced to make $10 million to pay for his medical bills to survive. And somewhere in there, he also got involved with the Mexican cartel. If you're going through some challenges right now and you want to feel unstoppable, this is the guy who David Goggins wants to be when he grows up. We're going to dive into number 1, how to become so mentally strong that nothing can stop you. For example, starting from the age of 2, he had pneumonia 16 times and his mom would have to manually break his ribs so he could still breathe. And he can still feel his entire body, he just can't move. Secondly, we're gonna get into the strategic ways in which you can become powerful. For example, as a 17-year-old, he strategically made friends with a hitman to take care of his abusive stepdad. Thirdly, how to turn any disadvantages into massive opportunities. He's found that anytime life hits you with a massive challenge, like when the medical system forced him into poverty, there's always an opening, an opportunity that wasn't there before. You just gotta find it and then capitalize on it, which is how he made all this money. And number 4, dating advice. A very unique perspective from a man who doesn't fit the usual beauty standards and still dated a flight attendant and had multiple girlfriends. And what he's learned is fascinating. So any excuses you may have, this conversation will light you up. And it all started with his medical condition. Your story is insane. You're born with a fatal disease. You can only move your face. You had to make millions of dollars to, at a young age, to survive the medical system because it failed you. And somewhere in there, you mentioned you also had some involvement or crossed paths with the Mexican cartel, which I want to hear more about as well. So give me a TLDR version of the key milestones of your story.
The first piece is to understand how my disease works. So the easiest way to understand is, imagine you wake up one morning and you can't move, but you can still feel everything. So a mosquito lands on your arm and you can see it and you can feel it, but you can't move. You literally can't do anything about it. That's my day-to-day life. That's how I have lived. It's having complete sensation, but no ability to move. My only interaction with the world are my eyes and my face. That's literally how I do everything, from working to friendships to everything. It's all on my face and with my brain. And the big question is, how far can you go if that's all you have? If all you have are your thoughts and your eyes and your face, how far will that take you in life? And that's been a question that's driven me ever since I was born. Is I believe that the core of what makes us human isn't our arms, it isn't our legs, it isn't our bodies. It's actually our brain. And I wanted to see how far I could go with just my brain and how many of those expectations I could prove wrong. And that's what I've done with my life.
You're not only surviving, but also thriving, right? You have a multi-million-dollar business, and you took control of your life where it seemed like things were out of control. So walk me through the key points that you went through in your story that got you to where you're at now.
So at 1 year old, my mother noticed I wasn't crawling correctly. And she got worried and took me to the doctor. And they did a bunch of tests and came to the conclusion that I had a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, which is the number one genetic killer of infants. At the time, um, over 90% didn't live past the age of 2. So doctors told her, get ready to say goodbye to your son. That was the message. It wasn't, here's how you prepare, here's how you take care of him. It was, get ready to say goodbye. And my mother did not agree that that was the only thing to do. My mother had this sense of defiance. Um, and she didn't work. She took care of me night and day. And I survived to 2 years old, and then to 3 years old, and then to 4 years old. And nobody could offer any explanation. In retrospect, a lot of it was my mother. I got incredible care. Um, the other piece of it was my father realized I was going to have all of these medical bills, and he started working really, really hard. And he made millions of dollars. And he literally paid $500,000 plus per year for my medical bills as a child. And one of the reasons I survived was that he could afford to do that. There just aren't many parents who can afford to do that. So the reason why I'm here, at least partly, comes down to 2 incredible parents. A mother who took care of me emotionally and physically, and the father who took care of me financially. And that meant I experienced all of the same things that kill most other kids, but I survived. And I kept surviving and basically became a medical wonder to the point where doctors nowadays study me and my condition and the things I've survived. I'm one of the oldest people, I think, in the top 10 in history with my disease. And doctors study what I've done to learn what advice they can give to parents now who have young kids with my disease. So that was the environment. I grew up in this environment of you could die anytime. I got pneumonia every year. My bones were extremely brittle. I was extremely weak.
Just for context for people, pneumonia is when your lungs fill with mucus and you have to cough it out, which in your case, you weren't able to.
Yeah. So the lungs fill with mucus, and the mucus, while it stays in your lungs, it actually starts causing parts of your lung where it is to die. So I have scars all over my lungs from where the mucus was. And at one point, when I was 16, I had one lung fill completely and the other lung halfway. So I only had 1/4 of my breathing capacity in order to be able to survive. And I almost died that time. And if not for my father, literally paid like 50 grand for a helicopter to bring an experimental medication from Duke University, that saved my life. And if not for that, I would have died in the hospital. So, up until the age of 16, my life was going to school getting sick, having broken bones, and that was it. That was my entire life.
Your parents eventually separated, and things from there took a turn.
They did. When I was 9 years old, they separated and they got divorced. My father was going through a mix of two things that I didn't understand until much later. My father thought that I was going to die. And the idea that he would give everything and I would die anyway was causing him to pull away. He didn't want to, he was afraid to emotionally connect with me on a deep level because he thought it was all going to end in tragedy. That's what the doctors told him. And also, my father, being a wealthy man, whenever he came home, my mother's entire attention was on me and keeping me alive. And it wasn't much of a happy, carefree home life. And he eventually just decided that wasn't what he wanted. Um, and he left. And they had a very bitter divorce battle for about 5 years. And during that process, my father lost his fortune. My mother was extremely poor. And we became so poor that we basically depended on welfare and churches to survive for a couple of years. And it was a really rough time.
Now you're in a very different spot. Help me close that gap. What happened between then?
So it was interesting that my father's wealth was like a roller coaster. So it had these giant upswings and giant downswings. And that taught me what it was like to be wealthy and poor all in the same childhood.
What was his profession?
Real estate developer. So when real estate was hot, he would literally make millions of dollars. When it would crash, he would literally lose everything. And he was always extremely leveraged, going all in all the time. So that taught me about two different sides of life. And it also taught me about risk and being an entrepreneur at the same time. And because of that, it actually enabled me to be a really effective entrepreneur and to really acutely understand risk, even at a very, very young age. And that's made me millions of dollars. The best I can estimate is about 15 million.
And you had this really interesting part of your backstory where you were pretty much forced to make a lot of money at once because you're trapped in the medical system where if you made more than $700 a month, they would take it because otherwise you would get off of Medicare. Is that how that worked?
At 18 years old, I was allowed to get Medicaid because I was an adult, and Medicaid would pay for 40 hours a week of nursing care, plus all of my doctors and medications and hospital visits. So we're talking several $100,000 a year of benefits. No other insurance would pay for it at the time because my condition was a pre-existing condition. And insurances at the time were allowed to exclude you based on pre-existing conditions. So Medicaid was the only insurance I could get. And the requirement was that I had to be living below the poverty line in order to be able to get it. So that basically forced me to live on $700 or $800 a month at the time, or otherwise I would lose all of my insurance.
Living in poverty is one thing. Being forced into poverty and having this entrepreneurial mindset and this hunger and this intellect, it seems like a completely different thing. So where did you go from there?
It was incredibly frustrating. When I graduated college, I had 11 job offers in writing from different companies. And I literally could not accept any of those job offers because if I did, I would lose all of my benefits.
And how much money would you have had to make from a job in order to be okay losing the Medicaid, because then you could pay for your own bills? Like, how much was that at the time?
About 300,000.
So either you make pretty much nothing or 300,000.
Those were the two options. Yeah.
Great.
I felt extremely trapped. I felt like my talent and intelligence was being wasted. And after I graduated college, I basically spent 1 to 2 years just thinking of a way out of that situation. And I eventually came to the conclusion that there are different forms of currency. That money is one way that we exchange value, but it's not the only way. Another way is with favors. And so I started writing for different websites as a freelance writer in exchange for very small favors. And normally that favor was an introduction to someone that I wanted to know. It's a very easy favor to ask. I'll write this article. I'll ask, could you please introduce me to this person that I know you know? And because of that, I quickly became one of the best connected writers in the world. And my writing started getting shared on social media like crazy, where my average post was getting over 1 million visitors every time I would write. So, because of that, I became a very, very in demand writer. Everyone wanted me to write for them because I got so much traffic. But I couldn't accept payment. And I finally arrived at the spot where the biggest marketing site at the time was called Copyblogger. He wanted me to become the editor of the blog and to not only write every week, but manage like over 200 other writers that wrote for the site. And he wanted to pay me, but he couldn't. So he asked me, what did I want to do? I explained my situation. And I said, well, here's the deal. I'll do this for you. But one day in the future, I'm going to ask for a really big favor and you can't say no. And that was the deal. And I worked for about 2 years for free under that arrangement. The business tripled or quadrupled during that time period. Brian made millions of dollars. And I figured out my escape. So at the end of that time period, I moved to Mazatlan, Mexico, to where a nurse was about $5 an hour for a registered nurse. And that reduced my healthcare costs from $300,000 a year down to like $60,000 a year. were $80,000 a year. So it made it much more affordable. And I moved to Mexico, and I told Brian, it's time for me to call in that favor. And he said, what do you want? And I said, I'm going to start my own agency and consulting firm. I want you to email all, I think it was 35 million readers we had at the time. I want you to email them and endorse me, which is something he had never done before for anyone. And he said, you want one email? And I said, yeah, that's it. And he said, deal. And he sent out that email. And the next day, I had over 500 clients paying me 500 and eventually $1,000 an hour.
Wow. So that was your escape. And then you made enough to take care of your own medical bills and staff because you were in Mexico?
Yep. So I went from $0 to it's like 200,000 or 300,000.
Wow. Literally overnight success. That makes a really good copy for a course.
Yeah. Yeah. It was surreal. I lived on the beach for about 5 years, and I just wrote and built up my income and my wealth to where I could afford to come back to the US, to where I could afford to every year pay $300,000. The other big thing that changed was Obamacare. So when Obamacare was passed, it became illegal to exclude someone because of pre-existing conditions. So I went from unable to get private insurance to every private insurance had to accept me. The only thing they didn't have to pay for was nursing care, but they had to pay for all of my doctors, all of my prescriptions, all of my hospitals. And that was still a major expense. So when that was passed, I got Blue Cross Blue Shield, the like platinum plan, and it cost me the same thing that it would cost you. And that was another big change that enabled me to come back to the US.
Wow. You're probably a health insurance company's worst nightmare client, right? It must have been a terrible day for them, but luckily, finally, a great change for you.
Like right now, I have one medication that I take that's for my disease that is $30,000 a month for that one medication. Wow. So, I mean, that just tells you the amount of money they spend on me. Now, we could argue about whether that's good for society or bad for society, but it's really good for me. Like without that, I would have never been able to afford to come back to the US.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm not gonna get mad here. All right. I'm not gonna scream for justice here. There's so much other shit that happened in the course of your life where I remember last time we sat together and you told me this story. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when you were on my channel. Your mom would literally, when you had pneumonia, she would push on your stomach to the point where she broke your ribs. And the doctors even told her, hey, just stop, just let him die. And then you also talked about this car accident that you got into that shattered your bones to the point where it was like imagine marbles in a sock is what you described it as. Right. Those were your bones, and they had to adjust them without anesthesia, which was absolute torture. I just think of the average person that goes through something like this or finds themselves in a position like that. that would go, you know what? The system is against me. I've been dealt this bad card, like this bad set of cards. I'm just gonna try to get by. But it seems like you went, okay, I'm not just gonna get by. I'm gonna see how far I can push it. Like, what do you think is that difference? Are you born with it? Did you develop it? And if so, how?
It's two things. First, my life gave me a tremendous tolerance for pain to where I was able to accept levels of pain for periods of time just because I'd basically been imagine like you have a child and you want to make that child as impervious to pain as possible. And when they become an adult, I was basically that child. I had tons and tons and tons of pain. So when you talk about a broken bone or um I even went through a surgery awake as well. I went through a kidney surgery awake um, with no anesthesia. Those kinds of things were possible for me because I had a very different perspective on pain than most people do. The second thing was you reach a point in life where things get bad enough where you have two choices. You like imagine someone has you by the back of the head and they're drowning you in the river. You've got your head underwater. You can basically give up and die. That's choice one. Or you can say, fuck you and fight. And I chose fuck you and fight. It was a very defiant attitude. And I was consciously aware that those were the only two choices. And I just decided if I'm going to die, it's not going to be hooked up to a morphine drip in a nursing home where no one cares or notices. I'm going to live as big as possible. And if I die, it's going to be like a spectacular explosion and a spectacular death. That's what I decided.
I love that. But that's what I find so fascinating because I think there is a mode in between where, like, I'm thinking of a buddy of mine who I became friends with after he started listening to the show, and he reached out and we got in touch, and he's been trying the entrepreneurial thing for the last 4 years and over leveraged himself, made some bad investments, lost all his money, and now he's doing door to door sales to pay off a bunch of debt, and he's now in his 30s, and he's like, oh man, like I thought I'd be in a very different spot. And he's starting to lose hope. So he's still trying. He's still like, I'm still going to go for it. But in the morning, he wakes up hopeless and almost like starting to try to just get by rather than, okay, hey, how's this? How's this going to help me grow? And how am I going to just not just walk towards that goal, but run towards it? It seems like you were running towards it. Was it just because the level of adversity was so high, or was there something else that
So
created
this
that?
brings up a really important point. I never had hope. I always believed I would fail and I would die. Always. But my entire life was one gigantic fuck you that I was going to go out my way. And anyone that's facing hopelessness or depression, one of the most important things that you can realize is that at the end of the day, the only thing you have control over is what you do. That's it. And you can live the life that you want to live. And sometimes the most powerful response that you can have is just to say, fuck you. So, in your friend's case, if I were in that situation, I would declare bankruptcy. That's one way of saying, fuck you to all of your creditors. And then from there, I would start another business.
I thought maybe door-to-door sales. The moment the person opens the door,
Yeah.
fuck you. Do you want any of these?
Um,
I'm glad you clarified that.
yeah, no, I would say whenever you're in a negative situation, it's that you're literally being drowned by something. So in his case, he's being drowned by debt. And he's responding to that with door to door sales. Okay. Um, and maybe that is the responsible thing to do. On the other hand, you're still being drowned by all of that debt that you came up with. And one essential perspective is to look at what is it precisely that is pulling you under. And whatever that thing is, to do whatever you have to do to get rid of it. And that's one difference in perspective that I think I have. I don't really think about shoulds or ethics. I think about life and death. And when it's a matter of life and death, you do what you have to do to survive.
You talked about this idea of a counterpunch as well the last time we talked about your story. And it sounds like that's really what it is. When life hits you in the face,
Exactly. So every adversity opens up an opening. Um, my life gives me an insane story that makes people like you want to interview me and makes videos go viral on YouTube. That's the counterpunch. Um, every adverse situation has a counterpunch that you can look at. So, for example, your friend that was in debt, one counterpunch I could imagine is negotiate your way out of all of the debt, restart your life, and then start a business that helps entrepreneurs with crushing debt, where you help them as a service. And then you make millions of dollars that way. That would be a counterpunch. And that opportunity is always there.
it's like that idea that, looking back, you can connect all these dots. It's like you are like drawing the lines between the dots as you're going, right?
Yeah. And I learned to look for opportunities where other people don't see them. It's a skill to train yourself not to react emotionally to the bad thing that's happening, but to look for the opportunity that's in front of you. And if you can train that skill, you eventually learn that opportunity is always there. There's not a situation where it's not. It's literally always there.
You mentioned earlier that the thing that drove you, or not necessarily drove you, but really supported you, was that you didn't have hope. So there was just, I'm just gonna see how far I can push it. Do you think that was maybe that you didn't have anything, you felt like you didn't have anything to lose? Because I feel like sometimes people, they have what holds us back, or what holds me back is that um, if I fully went for it, what if I really, really try and then it doesn't happen? Or what if it does happen? Can I deal with the the results that come from it?
Yeah, and that brings up another skill. The other thing I like to do is to imagine the worst case scenario and then accept that I'm okay with that happening. So, for example, when I moved to Mexico to pay for my own medical bills, the worst scenario I could imagine is that I would get kidnapped by the cartel and murdered. And I just decided, well, there are worse things. I mean, that would be a cool way to die. So, sure, that's okay. If that happens, I'm cool with it. And if you accept the worst case scenario and you say, I'm cool with that happening, it gives you a sense of fearlessness because that's literally the worst that can happen.
You mentioned the Mexican cartel in this post that you made about a rundown of your life, age 1, age 2, age 4, like all these things that happen in your life. And one of the things is when your parents separated, at age 13, you said you said mother remarries, discovers his brother is a cartel boss in Mexico. I, I we didn't even get into that last time we talked.
It's a crazy story that I was afraid of telling for a long time. I mean, talking about the cartel has some of its own dangers. But yeah, my mother remarried and literally didn't find out until after she married that the guy's husband, I mean, the guy's brother, was the head of the cartel in Chihuahua, Mexico. And that um, literally they were untouchable by the law in both the US and Mexico. Like he had that much power. Um, and so at the age of 14, 15 years old, I got dragged into the cartel. He eventually insisted that we go live in Chihuahua with him, and I spent a summer around the cartel and sicarios, and that also had a really profound impact on me and the way I thought about the world.
In what way? Yeah. Let's get into it. What happened? What was your experience? What did you learn?
The biggest
What was that like?
thing that happened is there were multiple times where he would get drunk and beat my mother in front of me, and there's nothing I could do. And that sense of powerlessness, of not being able to save the person I loved most in the world, it made me realize that I never wanted to be that powerless. It made me realize that power has value and virtue, not just in the form of making money, but in the ability to stop bad things from happening, to make good things happen. And that going forward in my life, I wanted to accumulate power. The way I define power is the ability to shape the world into what you want it to be. That's what I define power as. If you find yourself unable to create the life you want, then you are powerless. If, on the other hand, you can create any life that you wish, you are powerful. That's my definition. And I learned that the cartel, because of violence, because of connections, because of corruption, was powerful. And I learned that as an American raised in a safe, kind of sterilized world, that I was completely unprepared to deal with powerful people. And I shifted my life goal from just surviving to accumulating power. And because of that, I was later able to save my mother. And it's one of the ways that I've also gotten wealthy, not by doing anything wrong. I don't do anything that the cartel does, but I do accumulate power intentionally in order to be able to create the things I want to create. Asking for an introduction when I write a blog post is a way of accumulating power. And ultimately, if you have enough power, any form of money or any life that you want is accessible to you. And I think people shy
So
away from it way too much.
yeah, I think Robert Greene, obviously, that's like the first thing people would think of, I think, right?
Yep.
It's the 48 laws of power. And I'm curious, what are some of the things that you learned in the process? So one of the things you mentioned was doing a favor for somebody else creates power.
I learned
Um,
that relationships were power. The way I ultimately saved my mother was I became friends with one of the Sicarios, one of the assassins that lived there in Chihuahua. Um, his name was Eduardo. I don't know his last name. And he liked me for whatever reason. He just really took a liking to me. And he told me if I ever needed anything to let him know. And he hated my stepfather. I don't know why, but he hated my stepfather. And so um, one day we were at breakfast. My stepfather had sent my mother to the hospital the night before to literally sew her ear back onto her head because he had beaten her so badly. And I came out to breakfast and I said, so there are three choices. Choice number one is you can kill me right now. Choice number two is you can pack up everything and I never see you again. Choice number three is I will have Eduardo kill you tomorrow. Those are the three choices. It's time to decide. And he turned white as a sheet, literally didn't say a word, went, packed up his stuff, and he left. And I never saw him again. I was 16 years old when that happened.
wow.
So I learned having friends matters. I learned that I didn't have to have physical power if I had friends who did. I learned that it's good to know who other people's enemies are. I learned it's good to know what your enemies are scared of. I learned that another lesson that both helped me and hurt me. I learned that no one was safe unless I was in charge. That was another lesson I learned, is that I couldn't trust adults to keep me safe. And that the only way I would ever be safe, and that anyone, including my mother, would ever be safe, is if I was in charge. That was a lesson I learned.
And then how did that affect you moving forward? All these lessons that you took away. How did it help you in business, in your adult life?
It helped me, number one, accumulate power. But number two, the way it hurt me was it made me a control freak. I literally, whenever anyone else was in charge, I became intensely afraid. Intensely afraid. And I would do anything I could to take the power away from that person. Anything I could. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why. I just knew that I felt this sense of not only am I unsafe, but everyone is unsafe if this person is in charge. And because of that, when I was a boss, I literally made every decision. I wouldn't let anyone make a decision. I was very slow to share power of any kind. And I didn't trust anyone. That was the way it hurt me.
And where are you at with that now? What have you learned since about that?
I learned going through, I eventually went to trauma therapy. I've had so much trauma. It's insane. My life is one long string of trauma. And I eventually learned and became aware that that was my belief, that I was acting out. And I learned that it was because of that experience with my stepfather. And I went through the very simple exercise of writing a letter to that 16-year-old kid and just telling him everything I was feeling and everything I'd done. And when I was done with that process, I literally felt all desire to control other people vanish and became a completely different person.
Just by writing one letter? What's the process for that? What's the psychology behind it, I guess? Like, why was it so
I
effective?
think it was effective for a few different reasons. Part of trauma is having emotions that you were unwilling to feel at the time. And then accepting those emotions and feeling them in the present. And it's like a wound that can't heal until that emotion is felt. So I went back and I felt how unsafe I felt. I went back and I felt how disappointed I was with all of the adults in my life. I went back and fully experienced all of that anger and all of that fear. And then I forgave myself. I said, I understand why you feel that way. I totally get why you reacted the way you did. But we're not surrounded by the cartel anymore. We're not powerless anymore. Other people are not in danger anymore. It's time to let that go. And because of that, I was able to let it go just in the span of a few days. And over the next 90 days, my company doubled in size when that happened.
Wow. It's always said that, the things that we struggle with that are most personal also hold us back in our career and all these other areas of our lives. But it really is true, right? It makes total sense. So how would somebody write a letter like this? What are the instructions? What are the prompts? Is it you acknowledge how you felt and how you might feel, and then you share what your life looks like today and that everything's safe? Or is there any specific prompt that you followed for that? Or any exercise that has a name that people can look up?
Number one, it's fully experiencing the way you felt in the past. What I like to picture is that in the past, I had all of these emotions that I just suppressed and I pushed them down. And now I've got to go back and feel all of those emotions. So that's the first step. The second step is to acknowledge that you were just trying to protect yourself and to acknowledge that your intentions were good of whatever that behavior is. And then the third step is to say, but is to point out the logical fallacy that everyone is in danger whenever anyone else is in charge. Is to point out, listen, no one else is in danger. We're in a completely different situation now. And just see what happens.
You mentioned earlier that one of the most challenging things was how disconnected you felt. You felt like you were not human. You were like a different being. And you had this ability to shut off your emotions where you would just not feel pain. It felt like a distant sensation. A part of me goes, cool, how do I get that? I want some of that. When I hit my shin, I need to sit down for 5 minutes because I have really sensitive shins. Like I wish I was more pain tolerant. So that's where my mind goes. How do I get some of that? And then how did you get your emotions back? So I'm curious about both of these questions are coming up in my mind now.
For the first part, there is a magical piece to being able to tolerate pain. And here's the secret. It's not easy, but it's simple. You have to disconnect the feeling with the reaction. Feeling pain is not under your control. You're going to feel it. What's under your control is whether you sit down when you bang your shin. That is completely a choice. Now, it doesn't feel like one to most people. It feels like you have to react that way. But if you can observe yourself, it's actually possible to control your reaction. And to get to a point to where you can feel the pain without reacting at all. If I break a bone, now you don't even see my facial expression change. That's how used to pain I am, and used to disconnecting the feeling from the reaction. The way you do that is by observing yourself. It's almost a type of meditation. It's observing what you're feeling and thinking, and then practicing not reacting. That's how you do it. So again,
It seems like it's stoicism practiced in the most hardcore version, physical pain. And then there's obviously downsides of suppressing your emotion, because I guess you did that with your emotional pain as well.
I did. Emotion is a reaction. It's another type of reaction. You can choose whether or not to feel it, whether or not to do anything with it. But there are hidden costs. If you don't experience it in that moment, you're probably going to experience it later in the form of trauma. The way,
with interest, right? It's like the emotion, almost like it
yeah,
increases every year. You carry more and
mhm,
more with it, and then at some point you have an emotional
you
outburst.
do. The easiest way to identify trauma is to see where you overreact. Wherever you overreact, there is some trauma in the past that is coming out at that particular time. And if you think about it long enough, you can probably identify what it is, identify what happened. And the counterintuitive lesson is the way to stop overreacting is to go back and experience the emotion that you didn't want to experience in the past. That's the equation.
So for you, that would have been feeling powerless, feeling out of control, and just, yeah, I guess feeling
I had to go back during various forms of trauma therapy and re experience 20 plus years of suppressed emotion. And it took me over 3 years of daily therapy of different types to do that. But the more I did, the more my emotions opened up and the more alive I felt and the less alone I felt. So I continued for 3 years.
was it worth it?
Absolutely.
What kinds of therapy have you tried, and what have you found most effective?
So what I learned is that different people respond differently to different types of therapy, and no one really knows what you're going to respond best to. So I tried psychotherapy, I tried EMDR, I tried basically um, desensitization, desensitization therapy, where you get triggered over and over and over again until you stop being triggered anymore. I mean, basically, imagine if you get really upset and overreact any time someone is late to a meeting. Well, then they engineer your life to where every meeting someone is late every time.
God, is that what happened in your team, or did your employees just make excuses? Oh, it's part of the therapy.
Well, no, I went to a training program where that's basically what they did to me for about 6 months. Um, is they identified all of my traumas, and then every day they triggered a different trauma. Um, and it was very painful, but also, I'll be honest, very helpful. At the end of it, I was very aware of all of my traumas and all of my reactions and less controlled by it.
Would you say the awareness alone already made a huge, I guess, step towards recovery?
It did. Also, for me, breath work was very effective. Just breathing in different rhythms while remembering different past events. That was very effective for me at releasing emotion.
Does it have a specific name, that kind of therapy?
Just breath work. If you look it up. Yeah.
Have you tried anything like internal family systems, IFS, past therapy?
No, never did. I did mainly psychotherapy, desensitization, um, EMDR, which EMDR didn't do a whole lot for me. Other people, it works really well for. Um, breath work. I never tried ayahuasca or LSD or any of those things. Um, Once I found breath work. That's the one that I did the most and probably helped me the most.
Psychedelics would be a medical risk for you? Is there another reason why you stayed away from it?
At the time, I, the honest reason why is I was afraid of the loss of control.
Ah,
Nowadays,
yeah.
nowadays, I am way more open to doing one of those things. But at the time, I was completely closed to the idea.
Yeah, I feel like your whole story makes me think a lot of somebody like David Goggins, where it's all about mental toughness, right? But you guys are at opposite ends of the spectrum where he chooses the pain every day. He doesn't have to, but he just dives into that. And on the flip side, you're somebody who was just, it was just thrown into it and you had no other choice.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know David Goggins, but I've read his books. For his book, I've watched his videos, and he strikes me as a man who is stuck in his trauma. Um,
Mm.
Now, in many ways, his trauma is a positive adaptation from where he was before. But when I look at David Goggins, I see myself before I went to therapy. That's just the way I see it. I don't know if it's true or not.
What are the signs for you?
Um, a lot of anger. Also, a lot of suppressing the reaction to pain. A lot of acting like a robot rather than a human. Um, and I have never once seen him look happy.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah. I guess it feels like he is preparing himself through mental toughness for these difficult things to happen. Meanwhile, all these horrible things happen to you, and you learned all these lessons through actually going through it. Whereas I feel like going for all these marathons is just preparing to be tough for when life gets tough. But I think his life is probably pretty
It
great.
probably is. Yeah, to me, he strikes me as a man inside of a prison. And I'm not inspired by him. I actually I feel sorry for him. Um,
Interesting.
and I feel that way because I know what it feels like. I know what he's talking about. I used to be David Goggins mentally. Um, and it sucked all of the joy out of my life. That was the cost. And nowadays, I mean, I'll be honest, there are some times if the choice is whether to die or suppress your emotions, go ahead, suppress your emotions. Is it good for you? No, but you can recover later. Um, there are times where you're going to have bad things happen and you are going to deal with it in an unhealthy way. And that's okay. On the other hand, to pretend like nothing bad happened and there's nothing to recover from is going to rob you of your humanity over time. That's what happened to me.
It's so interesting hearing this from you because usually the people that criticize David Goggins and say, "Oh, he needs to relax," are the ones who, they would do well just having some adversity in their life and going for a run and mentally toughening up, right? And so it's easy for him to say, "Hey, you just you're just being a bitch." Um, but coming from you, I think it's very different. So what, like, if you had a message for somebody who was in this mindset, who was like, yeah, just pain all the way, mental toughness, like, what would you tell them?
What's the price? And is it worth it? That would be my question. Now, maybe David says, I'm willing to give up all of my joy to be the person that I am. And if that's his decision, that's completely his call. And I respect his choice. On the other hand, to pretend like it has no price, I think is delusional. I think that if you're going to pay that price, you need to be aware of what you're doing. And there might be times when it's worth it. If I were a soldier in battle, I would probably take some of those perspectives in order to be able to do my job. I get it. On the other hand, if you're not a soldier and you're not in battle, is it really worthwhile to pay that price? My personal answer is I don't think so.
The question that comes up in my mind is it necessary?
No.
Because, I mean, on the outside, life's good. Like, food, shelter, relationships, like everything's there. I mean, maybe internally there's a lot of trauma and, stuff to look at and work out. But it's, yeah, like you said, as a soldier, if you are in the battlefield, it becomes a tool, but in the everyday life, it's probably just, you don't need it. And so you're just robbing yourself of joy. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he makes that call. He's just like, yeah, this is just how I live. That's it.
Yep. Nowadays
yeah.
in my life, I step in and out of that person most of the time. I leave my emotions completely turned on. But if I ever, about once every 2 years, I seem to have a medical emergency that almost kills me. And during those times, I turn off my emotions. I turn off my reactions. I become robotic, and it has continued to save my life. But afterward, I always do breath work to experience all of the emotions that I suppressed at the time in order to be able to heal.
So it seems like you've married these two parts. And Charlie Hooper, he was on the show a few months ago. He talked about these these stages of growth or evolution, I guess, personal growth, where you start with a thesis, which is just your default, hey, I'm feeling all these emotions and I feel terrible. And then it seems like the antithesis, the counterpunch, the overcorrection was, I learn how to suppress my emotions, be like a robot, and distance myself from pain and not feel anything. And now it seems like you're marrying those two, right? The ability to feel the emotions when it's necessary and it's beneficial, and then also being able to, disassociate.
Yeah.
I guess that might be the next evolution of David Goggins, right?
Yeah.
So
it feels like, and it's one of the things I studied a little bit when I was doing trauma work. It's getting to know your shadow. It's getting to know this dark part of yourself and coming to terms with that shadow as not being an evil or a bad thing, but a piece of who you are that's useful at times to embrace.
That's a lot of parts therapy as well. There's a book about it called No Bad Parts. And it basically the idea that we have certain parts in ourselves that we judge and we don't want them to be in charge and we suppress them, and we have counterparts that are at war with them, but when we can all embrace them and see the benefit of them, that's when we heal. Yeah, I love that you talk about this, because this is what the podcast is about. It's for those over optimized overachievers who are kind of stuck in that things have to be difficult, they have to be hard. But I think the next evolution really is that you learn to also be happy, and then you have both parts, both modes, I guess. So because I think the most fulfilling parts of life, they only really become accessible when we stop over optimizing, stop trying to be overly disciplined. And I want to ask about your dating life. I remember last time you were mentioning some things that, you were like going on dates and stuff like that. So I'm very curious about that. But before I go there, there's one more question that popped up that it's just something I selfishly want to know myself. Do you ever look at average people, the everyday person, bitching about whatever problems they have, and you just think, shut the fuck up, just get over it, like stop being such a bitch? Is that a thought that ever crosses your mind?
The only time that ever crosses my mind is when I see a severely disabled person acting like a complete victim.
Oh.
That's the only time.
Okay. You're the only one who can think that, by the way. I can't think that. Stop being such a... Meanwhile, I hit my shin and I had to sit down for 5 minutes.
It's interesting that I would think that specifically about that type of person. And it's not a shut the fuck up. It's more of I have a very intense desire to talk to that person and to give them an alternate perspective, whether they want it or not.
I think you mentioned that too. You're in a Facebook group with people who have spinal muscular atrophy, and you are one of the oldest people in there.
Yeah.
And you are not always very popular in that group.
I'm not.
Because of this outlook on life that you have.
I'm not very tolerant of excuses, where most people would look at what they say as a very logical excuse. Like, I can't go on this vacation because I can't get any of my caregivers to go with me. Like, that might be something someone would say. And on the one hand, that's completely illogical. That, of course, you can't. On the other hand, my response is, what are you going to do? Just sit at home and hate your life? And I say, you got to figure it out. You can't just accept that. And that is not easy for some people to hear. And yeah, for that reason, I'm not always very popular with the disabled crowd. Because my response is always, well, what are you going to do? Just sit at home and watch TV? Is that the life you want? That's my question. And that puts them in the very difficult position of having to face that they were choosing the life that they were living rather than it happening to them. And that's a very difficult thing to accept if it's not the life you want.
How do they respond? Are there some people who are very inspired by you and go with it, and they're able to look at that and sit in that discomfort and then make something out of it?
It's about 50-50. About 50% will actually tell me, I really needed to hear that. Thank you.
Wow.
And the other 50%, it's basically, fuck you. And I'm okay with that. If they want to tell me, fuck you, it actually doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, I guess you have a very important voice in that community because, I mean, no one else can say that to them, right? Other than somebody who's in the same position and is on the other side.
Yeah. And because of that, I would say I have less sympathy for everyone in the world than your average person. I can empathize with difficulties. I don't judge people who are struggling. On the other hand, I'm much more likely to say something, even to my friends and family, if I think they're making an excuse that's holding them back, even if that means they get angry with me. That kind of honesty is one of the prices of being my friend.
It makes it scary to be a friend when you're somebody who is willing to call out people's BS. And I've heard this from a friend of mine. He said, I'm sometimes scared to meet you and meet up with you because when we hang out, sometimes I meet myself. And yeah, I've had very difficult conversations and just brought things up to people where I told them like, hey, this is something that we all see, but nobody has the balls to tell you. And so this is what's going on.
Personally, those are the only people I will be very close friends with. It's people like that. I really value, and all of my best friends tell me on a regular basis, John, you're full of shit because of A, B, and C. And it's actually really hard to tell someone like me who's been through what I've been through that they're full of shit. But I really value friends who will do that for me, and they're almost always right. And I almost always learn something from it. And I value my own growth more than I value my comfort.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest compliments is having people or your closest friend hold you very high. It's like, yes, there's all these difficulties and you're so much bigger than this. Whereas the opposite, I think you see this with parents where they helicopter their children and they protect them from any from any discomfort, and I think subconsciously the kid picks it up and realizes, oh, like I'm not capable because my parents protect me from this. And then I think they actually develop this low self-esteem. Like I've seen it. I've seen it anecdotally quite a lot. So
it's another lesson for everyone, for all of your listeners. Find people who hold you to a high standard and do tell you things you don't want to hear, especially if you're an entrepreneur. Having those friends is really important. Your employees aren't going to tell you because it's too dangerous.
No. Yeah, I've had this experience where I let go of a team member and he was great. I loved the guy. And that was the problem, was that I really liked the person and I couldn't justify keeping them on the team because of the lack of results, which is also a big part on me because I just wasn't an effective leader at the time. And a friend of mine said, oh yeah, I saw from the beginning that wasn't going to work out. And I looked at him, I was like, what do you mean? You saw it from the beginning, you said nothing? 12 months of salary down the drain as plus opportunity cost, like I'm in a bunch of debt now because I made the stupid mistake of borrowing money from a friend's business. And so yeah, and then I made it very clear. And one of the things I learned too was rewarding people for giving you honest feedback because it's very painful in the moment and you always want to go into defense mode. But I always make a point to say, thank you so much. That means the world to me. Because I've given feedback to people before who said they really value it and they really want it. And they immediately got super defensive. And I was like, okay, what you're teaching me is don't give your feedback.
Exactly. And by the way, this, and maybe this is the transition. I also demand that same level of honesty out of anyone that I'm dating. And I give it at the same time. If you want to know how to have a really healthy relationship, this is one of the biggest secrets that I've personally learned is that only date people that are 100% honest with you, and you should be 100% honest with them at all times. It's one of the most important things I've learned. And it was also one
So
of my biggest surprises when I was first starting to date.
when did you first start dating, and what was that like? Because I think in one of your posts you said, for years I told myself no girl would ever want me, so why even try to date? And you believed you were gonna die a virgin. So how did you get started with your dating journey?
One of my friends, this connects right back into it. His name is Johnny Truitt. He asked me one day, "Why don't you have a girlfriend?" And
That's a great question.
I I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer. I mean, at first I was like, well, it's just not possible. No girl is going to want a guy who can't move. Like, if you take any woman's like definition of their ideal guy, in no circumstance am I that ideal guy. It never happens. So I was like, well, it's just not possible. And he said, you know, in every other area of your life, you live with so much courage.
Wow.
Is this, and this is the one area where you're a complete coward.
Wow, that is a great friend.
Yeah. And I thought about it and I said, you know what, he's right. So if I'm going to be consistent, I need to apply the same level of courage that I apply in every other part of my life to dating. Then I went to my worst case thinking. Well, the worst case is no girl is going to want me. And I'm going to end up alone, just like I am right now. So I've
Nothing to
got
lose.
nothing to lose, except maybe some time. And at the time, I was making enough money to where I really didn't have to, my business was running without me. And I didn't really have to work every day. So I said, well, let's give it a 30-day trial. And I hired a dating coach. And he had me start asking out or start asking every woman who I saw that did not have a wedding ring to go out on a coffee date. Every single woman, whether I was attracted, not attracted, whatever, and to get her phone number. And
Wow. So going into a coffee shop, you just look like the horniest dude.
yeah,
Just like, hey, excuse me. On to the next one. Excuse me.
and like even everywhere I went, like if I went to a restaurant, I would ask out the waitress. Um, everywhere I went, every single woman, even if she was 70 years old, I would ask her. I would ask her out. Um, and at first, I was petrified and got a lot of very sweet rejections. And gradually, I learned that their response depended mostly on my energy at the time. And if I was happy and I had no expectations of what they said in return, that eventually almost 100% would say yes if I had good energy at the time. And so I learned to start being in a joyful, happy, non expectant, non needy state. And I ended up in that 30-day period. I went out on, I think it was over 100 coffee dates. It's 3 a day that I did.
Wow. You just stayed at one coffee shop?
Yeah. I would
They just
I would
really
literally schedule them.
revolving door?
Yeah, back to back. Back to back, I would schedule them.
Wow. That probably also helped your dating odds. Where you're like, oh, this is my third date today.
I mean, they were all fascinated.
Yeah.
And I had no expectations of the date going anywhere. Zero. And I was completely myself. I did not try to impress them. And I was very curious about who they were. And that was my attitude. And I literally, during those 30 days, I probably had 200 hours of conversations with women about their lives. And I learned so much.
That would be a really, really niche, but potentially very successful podcast.
Yeah. The first thing I learned is that women are not men, which sounds obvious, but men often treat women like they are pretty men, and they are not. They think entirely differently than men do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing. If I were a woman, I would be screwed because guys are almost entirely physical. They're almost entirely visual. And I am not that visually attractive. On the other hand, women are not that way. Women, they say they like confidence. What they mean by confidence is that you respect who you are as a person and that you do not place anyone else's opinion of you above your own. That's what they mean by confidence. That's already who I was as a person. And so I found out they were immensely attracted precisely because I respected who I was as a person. And that is an attractive thing to a woman. I also learned that women evaluate your whole life, not just your body. They evaluate, where do you live? Do you have any friends? How do other people respond to you? Do they respect you? All of those things. I had an amazing life before I started dating. And so as a way of kind of moving the story along, after those 30 days, literally 80% of the women wanted to see me again.
And then you had a whole different kind of problem.
I did.
I guess. A new set of problems.
At the end of that 30 days, I had 20 women texting me good morning every day. 20 different women.
And they knew of each other. They knew that you went on that many dates. Wow. So I think, like, I want, especially the guys, in the audience to get this. Because nowadays there's this whole thing with the dating crisis. It's so difficult to get dates, and there's this whole section of the population of men who, I don't know if you've heard of this
Yeah,
at
I have.
all, but it's this dating crisis. I feel like, I don't know, is this a new thing, or if you go back in time 50 years ago, 100 years ago, was it already a thing? I don't know. But from no dates to 30 days later, you had 20 women texting you in the mornings. Um, that's, yeah, like you're doing it again, right? Just busting myths and excuses, right? Because yeah, yeah, I just think I think it's just paradigm shifting for someone out there, and somebody might say, oh well, they thought you were rich, so they just wanted your money. What would you reply to that?
Women are attracted to value, and there are different forms of value. Value grabs their attention. It doesn't make them stay with you, by the way. But
Mhm.
if you are a big, muscly guy, that's a form of value. You're strong. If you can fix her car, that's a form of value. If you are rich, that's a form of value. There are all of these different forms of value. If you're well connected, if you know lots of people, that's a form of value.
If you're funny,
Yeah. So value grabs the attention of a type of woman, of any woman. Okay. And some women value some forms of value more than others. Okay. In my case, yes, being rich did grab their attention. It made them want to talk to me. Did it make them stay with me? No, not at all. There are plenty of rich guys who can't keep a girlfriend. And it's because
yeah.
they grab their attention, but then there's nothing interesting on the other side.
Mhm. And just for anyone who's saying, oh well, I don't have money, so I can't do it, right? It's just, you could be funny, you could be well connected, you could just be resourceful in the sense of, um, you know how to solve problems even when you don't have the resources. You're just capable. Yeah.
It can be any form of value. Now, if you have no value to offer, you need to look at yourself and reconsider your life. Um, that's not her problem, it's yours. Okay. So, as a man, you do need some sort of value, and none of those values are better than another. There are guys who are really good at fixing things who are more successful than I am with women being rich. So it doesn't really
Mhm.
matter which one it is, but you have to have a form of value.
I think it's also rare that you see a really good looking guy who's also really funny and has a great personality. Like usually the guys who are like 6'3" and they're muscular, athletic, they just have a cardboard personality. And they just, I don't know, they're just not funny or fun. So it's, yeah, there's all these ways to stand out. And I mean, even expanding that to other areas of life, right? Like in business, there's so many ways that, you may not have this, but you can excel in this other way.
On the back end, it's all about, and this is more controversial, but it's about how easy would you be to replace?
Mhm.
That's what it's about. Um, if you are interesting, but not very different, um, then keeping a relationship is hard. On my side, how easy am I to replace? How easy is it for her to find another guy like me? It's actually almost impossible. Because of that, I almost never,
David Goggins.
yeah, because of that, I almost never have any girl wanting to leave. It almost never happens. Um, but it's not because I'm rich, it's because the experience, the person that I am is not common. It's just not common. And that lesson is if you really want to have long term success with women, you need to become an uncommon man. That's what you need to be. And that can mean lots of different things. But those were a lot of lessons that I eventually learned. Um, Women were not only interested in me, my first two girlfriends asked me to marry them.
So this is where it went, I guess. You had how many dates, and then where did those things lead?
Yeah, I went on that 30 days of dates. At the end of the 30 days, I chose a girl who was a flight attendant to be my girlfriend. Um, Beautiful girl. And we were together about 9 months. And she told me that she was head over heels in love and that she wanted to get married. And I wasn't in love with her. And I just told her, I don't feel the same way. I like you a lot. I enjoy my time with you, but I'm not in love with you. And if I stay with you and waste your time, I'm going to feel like a piece of shit.
Why didn't you love her? What was missing?
Why didn't I love her?
Was there anything missing, or was it just a feeling?
I've only fallen in love one time in my life. And I have no idea why. I don't know why love happens. And I don't know if it's a choice.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like
That's why I
one.
asked that question that way.
It didn't feel like a choice when it happened.
What was her reaction when you said no?
It's actually really sad. At first, she just got really sad. She cried. Eventually she got depressed. About 2 weeks later, she called me and said, I just swallowed a bottle full of pills. And I want your voice to be the last thing I hear before I die. And I hung up on her and I called 911 and sent the ambulance to her house. And they saved her life.
No way.
When she got out, I told her, take care of yourself. I will never speak to you again. You need serious mental help. I called her family and I told them she needs serious help. This is what's going on. I'm out. And I never spoke to her again after that. Mainly because that was such, number one, showed that she had serious mental problems. But number two, she was trying to hurt me with her own death by talking to me on the phone. And I cannot have someone in my life who would ever do something like that. And so that was crossing a boundary that could not be uncrossed at that point. But that was my very first girlfriend. I learned a lot the hard way. And I was 31 years old at the time that happened. A lot of it was great. During the relationship, she was exactly the tender, patient girl that I needed to come out of my shell, and to gain confidence as a man. So I'm not resentful. There was good and there was bad. Um, you know, but it also taught me that not only was I desirable, but that the women would actually love me, like really love me, like want to spend the rest of their life with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what got me actually to start thinking about trauma and to start taking it seriously and to start going to trauma therapy. Because I realized maybe the reason I didn't love them was that I didn't feel anything for anyone
Mm.
and that I was completely shut down. And it was my second girlfriend, who was a doctor, that really got me to start looking at that. And turned out to be true in every possible way.
Was she your doctor? Is that how you guys met?
Yeah, so she was not my doctor. I met her on, I think it was Tinder, of all places. But and there's some elements of her story. Her family has asked me never to mention her name or to give any identifiable information. So there are a couple of these things that I've changed about her to protect her.
Gotcha.
But she was the doctor. She was brilliant, beautiful, and my second girlfriend. And we fell in love. That was the one and only time that I've fallen in love. It was incredible.
That was before you did any of the trauma work, right?
I was just starting to do trauma work during that time. I don't know why I fell in love, other than she was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But she fell in love too. She started basically living at my house, came over after work every day, slept at my house. We started talking about getting married. I agreed. Sure, we'll get married. She went and to get a beer on Rainy Street in Austin with her best friend and to talk about the wedding. She came out of the bar and two guys jumped out of a van, drug her into a back alley, and raped her in an alley on Rainy Street and beat her head against the cement until it broke her skull. And she was still alive. She got up, somehow made it back to her car with a broken skull, drove back to my house, came into my house, woke me up, and said, "John, something terrible happened." And She collapsed on top of me, bleeding everywhere. And I had my nurse at the time call 911. And she spent the next 6 months in the hospital. She developed schizophrenia. She had huge memory loss. Some days she didn't speak. Some days she didn't remember who I was. Some days she thought I was the one who raped her. And after about 6 months, she had a lucid day. She remembered who I was, who she was. I'd gone to see her every day in the hospital. And she told me, John, I love you enough that I can't let you take care of me. I can't let you stay with me. I will love you until the day that I die. But today is goodbye. And after that, I never spoke to her again. She would never take a call. She wouldn't let me in the door. I spoke to her father for about 2 years, and she never improved.
How long ago was this?
This was about 6 months before you and I met at a poker game.
Oh, wow. So it must be, 4 or 5 years ago now. 5 years.
6 years ago, yeah.
See, I think that was the first time we met. And I had no idea. No idea that this is something that you possibly could have gone through at the time.
In some ways, it was the most terrible thing I ever went through. It hurt me more than having pneumonia 16 times. It was the only time in my life I have wanted to die. It was the only time. I became a different person for a while. I started taking drugs. I started sleeping with lots of different women. I started not wanting to think, not wanting to work, wanting to forget. And it was a mutual friend of ours, David Gonzalez, who basically is another great friend who grabbed me, and he actually tricked me into going to a group therapy session. Told me we were going to meet some friends, and he actually took me to a therapy session.
Wow. Like a real intervention.
Yeah. It was during that time that I really realized what in fact trauma could have. And that I really realized how broken I was. And I went to therapy at first for the first year, 2 or 3 hours a day is about what it took. And I had to go to therapy daily for 2 years before I could even tell that story that I just told you now.
I think it's usually with love that we experience the highest highs and the lowest lows.
Yeah. On the other hand, if I could go back, we had about a year and a half, 2 years together. If I could go back knowing that I would lose her and live it again, I would do it. I would do it again. It was worth it. To feel that feeling of someone who completely understands you and knows you down to the depth of your soul. And to feel that, to me, she was home. Wherever in the world she was, that was my home. That kind of feeling is so, so special. And that was the time in my life when I knew that I wasn't alone, that I felt 100% human. And it showed me everything I had been missing up until that point. It showed me the price I had paid to survive. And it also showed me the beauty, what was on the other side of who and what I could be and what I could feel if I were to experience everything that I shoved way down deep. And it made me commit to becoming that man and to not settling for just being a robot who made his way through life. So for that, I will forever be grateful.
Wow. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for sharing your story, and thank you for being who you are.